Hi, my name is Petra Demuse, and this podcast is for you. It's about you. It's about not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, but standing up when you feel defeated, when you feel beat, when you feel lost, and just redoing something in a different way. It's called Stand Up and Redo. And this is the second episode, and this one is going to be dedicated to my Uncle Brian Demuse, who just passed from colon cancer. And that this is such a special, dear podcast for him. We made it before he passed, but in his recent passing, it is now for him.
So, death. What is death? I think death is crossing over into another experience, another place, another state of being. I for sure don't think that we just disappear and everything is over. I feel like we're much more than just a body and flesh and bones and blood and all the other good things that are in our bodies. I feel like we are a spiritual being, and that this body that we're in right now is just a shell. And I feel like that just from my own personal experiences in life. And I'm going to talk about demons and angels and scary stuff in this, and it's going to be, I think, very impactful for you if you don't understand death. And truly, it's going to be going by honestly my feelings about the experiences that I've had with death. Um, well, I'm a nurse, and I've been in the hospital setting working in med-surg nursing in the beginning of my career. And when you're a med-surg nurse, what you have to do often is receive people from ICU who basically you're finding out are being taken off the ventilator and they're going to die. And essentially, your job is to make that person feel comfortable in that process of dying. And not only do you have to help make that person feel comfortable, but you have to love their family, honestly, show that family that actually is going through the most maybe devastating time in their whole entire lives. You have to be a part of that with them. And just speaking for my fellow nurses, when you're in the hospital, every nurse that I've ever been with that has been taking care of a patient who is dying has just been all in helping that patient to feel comfortable. And sadly, sometimes we have to maybe not spend as much time with another patient. But the thing is this is that time in that person's life on earth, that they need to be with someone, or they need to be comforted, or they need to feel less pain. And it's a time that is a privilege to be a part of. So I'm going to tell you a story about the first person I ever experienced who died. And it was a man. And I'm going to use totally not real names, of course. His name was, let's say his name was Jesse. And he was an older gentleman. He, I'm sure, lived a full life. He was probably in his 70s, which actually I hate to say that's older because as I get older, I think 70 is pretty young. But anyway, he had had cancer and been treated for many years to treat his cancer. And due to all the chemicals that he had in his body, he was suffering from essentially the side effects of all the chemo and all the other things that he had in his life. So he was bleeding out internally in his whole body slowly, and essentially knew he was going to die. And I got to be a part of his life when he was a little bit coherent and with it. But then the next time he wasn't, the next day, he was just, it was his time to pass. And I know that everything I could do to make him comfortable, I did. I know that I was constantly calling the physician for medications to help him feel comfortable. I was in his room so much. I never wanted to leave his side. Unfortunately, I had to at times, but would run back and just hold his hand or just be with him as much as possible, constantly checking on him. And he was alone. There was no one in his room with him. There was no family with him. And I remember not even having the time to figure out much about his past life because he wasn't into conversing at that point when I became his nurse. He looked terrified at times. And I remember as we got really close to the end of his time, which was probably maybe like within an hour, he just had this look of fear, and he just was like staring and breathing rapidly, and just his eyes were terrified. And I just remember that was the point when I did need to stay with him, and I did stay with him, and I held his hand, and I comforted him as much as possible. And then I remember at one point just this incredible, amazing slowing down of his breathing, and just a relaxation of his body, and just he then passed. And it was, believe it or not, very peaceful feeling to see this man who was suffering and terrified just stop. And for me, it was very emotional because that was the first time I had ever seen anyone pass away or die or go to whatever next life they're going to go to. And soon, looking at him, I realized, and this is really morbid maybe to some people, but I didn't see him there anymore. I just saw a body that wasn't him. I knew he was not there in that body. And the body then was not, I knew he crossed somewhere else. And of course, we did all that we do with the body. And if I laugh at times as I'm talking to you, please don't take it personal and think that I'm demented or like sick. But sometimes when you're thinking about things, I think laughter is a little bit of a release. And amidst all this, at the time maybe that I'm telling the story, I certainly wasn't laughing. I was in a panic mode. But just know, this is what happened next. So we took care of him, and you have to take someone down to the morgue, and you can only wait a certain amount of time for family to come. So I had called his next of kin, and it was his brother. It was his brother, and let's say his name is Nathan. So you have Jesse and Nathan. And I called Nathan and spoke to him over the phone, and he was like 2 hours away. He was really far away, and he said, "I'm coming. I'm going to get there as soon as I can." And I said, "Okay, Nathan, I'll wait for you." And he told me exactly what time he was going to be there. And I talked to, I figured out that that would be enough time, that I didn't have to take him right down to the morgue, because you have to get the person off of the hospital floor and into the morgue within a certain amount of time. And I remember I had wrapped him in a body bag and done all that stuff that you're supposed to do with the body, to get it ready to go downstairs to the morgue. But actually, I didn't wrap him in the body bag. I'm so sorry. I waited, and Nathan didn't show up. And back then, this is the time when you don't have cell phones. You can't text this man. You can't call him. You have no idea where he is. You're waiting, and I knew that that the time had come that he needed to be downstairs, and I didn't want to, go against our policy or whatever to get him down to the morgue. So I pulled his body bag up around him and zipped him up and went out into the hallway, and I think someone was pushing him. I don't know if it was the orderly came and was pushing him down the hall, and I walked, the hall went into like a circle. So the morgue person, or the person that came to take him to the morgue, came and was pushing him around one way, and then I walked around the other way to go to the nurse's station, and then saw the elevator near the nurse's station open. And it opened, and there was it looked exactly like Jesse standing there. I didn't know that Nathan and Jesse were identical twins, and my heart just stopped. So I ran around. He didn't see me. Of course, he didn't even know what I looked like. The only reason I knew it was Jesse's brother Nathan was because he looked exactly like him. I think it was like seeing him stand there, the man that had just passed away. And that was even just a little bit freaky in itself. So I ran around and I grabbed the orderly. I said, turn around, quick, quick. I said, quick, take him back to the room. So we took him back to the room and we put him back in the bed. I had another nurse go stop Nathan in the hall and just talk to him and give us a couple minutes. And we took Jesse out of the bag and made him got the covers all up over him again, cozy. And well, he wasn't cozy because he wasn't there, but just made it look like he was in a peaceful place. And I hope that Jesse was in a peaceful place. At that point, he was not in that body anymore. And then Nathan, his twin brother, came into the room, and I just comforted Mr. Nathan. I just remember doing the best I could to comfort the twin brother, but you're really a stranger, and the most you can do is touch his arm or just say comforting words, but then stand aside and just be a presence there if they need you, but there's not really much you can do for the family other than just be present, I guess, and wait and see what they need from you. So that was my first experience with death. My second experience was, wow, I had a lot of experiences, and I don't think I can explain all of them. But I remember, wow, I will skip the one with it, but I'll go to this other two because they happened pretty much at the same time. And this is another, I don't want to say peaceful situation, but a situation where, oh my gosh, just in this moment of explaining this to you, as a med-surg nurse, we are with, like I said, a lot of people that die. And in the way that we are, it's very comforting, and maybe sometimes it's not comforting, but it's not like an ICU where they're coding, and it's a much different experience because we're really there usually to comfort. And if that's not the case, and they've died unexpectedly, then that's a horrible thing too. But either way, the next story I'm going to tell you about is two women. One was really young and one was really old. And I was taking care of, I'm going to call her Anna Marie. And she was very old. She was probably like in her 80s. And she was really not really there mentally. I think she had severe dementia. She was a little bit bedridden. She didn't really walk. And I just remember giving her affection and love in the manner of keeping her clean and feeding her. And I think she was actually on the upswing from her illness. I can't remember exactly what she had, but feeling like, oh, she's doing pretty well. We're going to get her probably back to the nursing home or wherever she was from soon, not feeling like she was in like any kind of danger of dying. And then I had in the very next room a call about a patient that was going to be admitted to the next room. She was a young woman, very young. I want to say maybe 40s or 50s. Don't even remember why she was on the ventilator, what happened to her at this time, whatever it was. She was brain dead, I think, and that's why the family had decided to take her off the ventilator. Well, this patient came down, and of course, she was supposed to die. The family was thinking that she was going to die right away when they took her off the ventilator, and she didn't. So they brought her down to be in med-surg, and she was just alive, but breathing on her own, but not really there. Somehow she was still breathing, and the family became very close to me that day. I became like every other, there were like 5 or 6 of them, and every couple minutes, Petra, come here, Petra, we need you, Petra, come here. What do you think? We think she's in pain, Petra, she needs more medicine, Petra this. It was all day, Petra. It was like, and I became so close with that family, and you form a bond with the family. Like you're there to be their strong arm, really. You're really there to be their strong arm. And that family really, really needs you because they're so lost. And I was waiting for her to die, and the family was waiting for her to die, and they kept asking me, "Do you think it'll be a couple hours?" Like, it wasn't. They just didn't know what was happening, and that unknown was so hard for that family. I had no idea either. Sometimes it's really hard to gauge things like that. So anyway, I had taken care of Mary Elizabeth, and oh my goodness, yeah. What did I say the name was? Anna Maria. Anna Maria. I can't remember either way. Mary Elizabeth. We'll call her Mary Elizabeth, the lady next door. And Mary Elizabeth, I had gotten her into, we used to use these things called Jerry chairs, which we don't use anymore, but it was a chair that the tray went over the patient. It's kind of like a high chair for older people. So we had her in the Jerry chair, and I had fed her breakfast and everything, and she was really out of it. And I cleaned up her breakfast and all, and, cleaned off her face and left her there. And I put a little orange juice with a little straw in it right in front of her, and I left. Well, maybe I came back like an hour later, to check on her because, you make your rounds and you're patient to patient. Went in and said, "Mary Elizabeth, why aren't you drinking your orange juice?" Picked up the orange juice, lifted it up to her mouth, and looked a little bit closer at her face and realized, oh my goodness, Mary Elizabeth is not alive. And she was actually not supposed to pass away. So that blew my mind. I went into a bit of a panic, realizing she was not. There's a thing called DNR, which is do not resuscitate. And it's very odd. I think it was just a shock. It's just odd to think you're not going to quickly do CPR on people, especially if you are an ICU nurse or a nurse that's worked in the OR or anywhere, because you have this urgency to immediately start rescue maneuvers. But this particular patient was DNR. So it was very calm, and I went to go ask another nurse to help me get her back into bed to clean her up. And as I stepped out of the door, within 2 minutes later, the young woman next door, the family, starts calling for me, "Petra, Petra," and I ran in there, and here she passed away. Within like 2 minutes, I had on the death certificates, when the doctor came up to check on the two patients that were my patients, and I really gave them great care. I know I did. And this was during that time, and this is where I might laugh because it's not sick, and it is sick a little bit to laugh at this, but it is how I felt. Like the whole entire all the nurses called me for a couple days, Nurse Kevorkian, because they thought, "What did you do? How did your two patients right next to each other in the same rooms both pass at the same time?" And it's just the way that it was, but. When you think about it, here's this one older woman all alone. And I'm going to try not to cry as I talk about death like this. But, 1 minute I'm laughing about it, but then I do feel like crying. And I think about her being all alone. And then in the other room, you have another woman with like, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 or how many people were with her every minute until she passed. And I don't know. I just think about that a lot. People being alone, and but either way. So that was that story, and that was an interesting day, and I felt at peace that day. I felt much sadder when Jesse died. These two, I was just there to comfort the family more the families more, and anyway, so I have to tell a funny story, and it's not really funny, but it still makes me laugh thinking about the story. I had a woman who was an older woman, another scenario. She came down from ICU and she was expected to pass within a day or two. And her two sons were there, and this older woman was in her 80s. Her sons were very established older men in their 50s. They had families and lives, and they lived far away from where I was at the hospital. They lived in other states, and both of them didn't even live near each other. And you could tell it was the time that these two brothers were just both sitting there with their mother, waiting for her to die. And they really were just reconnecting as well in their conversation. And it was actually very peaceful for me to go in with these two men and every so often have a conversation, check on their mother and see what they needed and see how things were in that room. But then I would get to be privy to their conversation, and they were just hysterical in their conversation. I don't know, they were just very entertaining, these two men. And they started talking about the woman's cat and their mom's cat. You know, they're like, they're talking about all the personal stuff with their mom, like how are we going to handle the estate and what are we going to do? And I remember thinking that's a little inappropriate. What if she can hear them talking about how they're going to handle her estate? It kind of made me very sad a little bit, and I had to be careful though. You know, you have to be careful what you say to patients and patients' families because you don't want to offend them, and you know you're with them for long periods of time, so you want them to know that you're respectful and kind to them. But it was the funny story was they started talking about how they're going to catch the cat because it was a wicked cat and it was like evil, and they were talking about how it just like scratch them, like they were trying to sleep in the bed at night, and it would just like attack them and scratch them, and like how are we going to catch it? What are we going to do? So then finally they talked about getting a boot and like shoving it in a boot, and it was just I was just had to pull them. I just whispered and said to one of them or two of them, I said, "Guys, come here. I want to talk to you for a minute in the hallway." And they came out and I said, "I know this is, you might not realize this, but there might be like a slim chance she can hear your conversation." I said, "Maybe you don't talk about catching the cat, putting it in a boot." And they were like, "Oh." They were just so, they were just so mortified, and I felt bad for them because they truly did care about their mother, and they weren't even thinking that she could hear them. And I always think that, and I like to tell, as a nurse, I would say, be careful because even though it seems like the person can't hear you talking, maybe they can. I mean, we don't know, you know, we don't know what's going on in their head, but it was just a funny story. So I have a lot of stories about med-surg death, and I won't get into them. But I'll tell you, for me as a woman and a nurse, I had two traumatizing deaths that were very unexpected, and I went to bed at night in my house, in my home, and I had, my daughters were teenagers at the time. Well, my one daughter, I think she was like just graduated high school, and maybe she was started going to college, so she was older. My kids are getting older. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. She actually heard, we went to bed, and she comes knocking on my door. Mom, I heard a crash outside. And I got up and said, what do you mean, Julia? She's like, there was a car accident right outside in front of our house. I said, are you sure? She's like, yeah, come on. So I said, okay. So I get myself together, and we go outside, and it's all dark and just super quiet. The road is just empty in front of our house, and we look both ways, right, left. We don't see anything that indicates a car accident just occurred. So I said, well, why don't you walk down the road that way a little bit, and I'll walk down the road this way a little bit, and we'll see if we see anything. So we did, and we didn't see anything. And then we kind of converged back again, and she's like, Mom, I know there's a car accident here. And she goes, I think I saw something a little bit shiny over there down in the ravine by the woods. Well, she didn't say it that way, but it was a ravine that went down into the edge of the woods. We have a place called Landis Woods, and there's some trees that come up. And I shouldn't really talk about exact locations, but I keep slipping when I'm doing this podcast. I think I keep saying things. Probably I'm trying to hide like people's names or locations, but either way, I don't live there anymore, so it doesn't matter. But this really did matter. We did see where the car went, and it was down a little bit in the ravine in the grass, and I could see just the one wheel of the car was like kind of shining and spinning, I guess, and the light was reflecting it from somewhere. And anyway, so I said to Julia, call 911. And I said, just stay here and don't come down here. I said, just wait here by the road for the police. I said, but don't come down here. I went down, and the whole car was smashed into a tree. And I couldn't get to him on the driver's side because I couldn't get to that side because there was another tree there. But I could get to the passenger side. And I couldn't reach him, but I knew he wasn't alive. I knew he was dead. And the only reason I knew he was dead, and I felt, and first off, I'm going to tell you, I could feel this, and this is how I know that there's an afterlife, and this is how I know that there's so much more than we are. I can't even describe it. I felt this rush of peace and love, and it sounds so weird to say that I felt this about this man. I just felt like he was either something amazing was coming to get him and take him, or he was rushing. He was just this amazing, spirit that he had turned into, and he was just passing by me. But I felt this amazing feeling that was brought on only by something bigger than me and more amazing than what I was just standing there. And I looked at him, and I could only see that the dash was all the way in his chest. You couldn't even see the steering wheel. His arms were hanging up over the dash, like almost like someone was stretching over the dash. A dash without a steering wheel, because it was in his chest. And his hair was beautiful. It was real. I think he was a Spanish man, and his hair was just long, and he was only like in his 20s, I found out later. And his hair was long and curly and wavy. And I just remember I could see the back of his head. I could never saw his face. And I tried to reach in the passenger side window. I guess the window was open. Somehow I could reach my hand in a little bit into the window, I remember. And I was trying to reach his head because I just wanted to touch him. And I felt like if I touched him, it was just going to be like a comforting thing for him, even though I don't think he was alive. I know he wasn't alive, obviously, and I felt that rush of amazing spirit, but I just felt this urge to just touch. I mean, I don't know. I'm a person that feels like touch is, I don't know. That's what I do. If I want to comfort someone, I feel like touch is important. If I'm going to pray with you, if I'm going to be near you, I might ask you if I can just hold your hand or touch your arm. And, either way, Julie never came down. I was so thankful she didn't. I didn't know what her mental ability would be to handle that sight. It felt like forever for the police to come. I felt like I was just waiting there with this young man. And that's that story. So then, a couple months later, I couldn't even believe it. I was laying in my bed again. And I heard this car speeding. And I went, wow, that car is like really speeding. It was far away from the house. And I could hear it getting closer and closer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can actually hear how fast that car is going. I mean, it must have been going at least 100 miles an hour. And I hear the car just speeding by the house. And then I hear boom, boom, like 2 huge crashes. And I'm like, oh no. So I get up and I'm getting myself together, and I hear my neighbor screaming Petra as loud as she could. And I think what happens, and this is for other nurses, they'll totally understand that this happens. When you're a nurse in your community, in your neighborhood, or anywhere, immediately, I think you're the strong arm. I think people want you to be there for them. And they think that they think you know every single thing about everything. They think you know everything that every medication does, every side effect. And we do know a lot. We learn a lot, especially if you're actively working in the hospital, but there's a lot we don't know. But I think, anyway, what happened was she was screaming my name, and this car accident happened a couple houses from my house. And this car accident, I was not the first responder. There were about 5 people standing up again on the road, looking down into the ravine. And this time it was not exactly, it was further north than the other car accident, which you don't have any spatial relation, so that doesn't really mean much to you. But If I walked out of my house for the other young man that I found, I would have gone to the right of my house. This man, I turned to the left, so it was almost exactly the same distance from my house either way. Just one was to the right and one was to the left. This car had flipped over, and the car, when you looked down to the ravine, was hanging upside down. I'm not even kidding. It was like suspended in two trees and a bunch of bushes. And nobody went down to check on anybody except for me. And at the time, it didn't even I didn't even take a moment to think that I wasn't going to slide down the ravine and get down there and see if there was anybody laying around that I could help. It wasn't even a thought not to go down. And I went down, I slid down the ravine, and I could see the car suspended. The car was so suspended that it was higher than my height. Actually, it was like it was maybe right at my height, head of my height. Like, I did have to bend down just a little bit, but not much, to see what I saw. And I saw the man hanging there. He was hanging. He was hanging out of the car upside down. And his arms were hanging down. And underneath of him was just this perfect, like this circular circle of blood that had just been draining out of his body. And I had to duck to get under the car, which is even crazier because when I think about this now, I think about that the car could have fallen on top of me. I could have been dead. The car was just suspended, and who was to say that it wouldn't have fallen out of the trees? But I didn't even think about that at the time. I squatted down at him, and I reached to grab his wrist. And I could feel his pulse still. And I could feel it go away. And he was dead, and I knew he was dead. And there was not a darn thing I could do. He was just stuck there, hanging upside down, bleeding out, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. And he was dead. His pulse stopped. And, again, waiting for the police to come. Not that they didn't get there as soon as they could. And actually, it did feel sooner for them to come for him. But I didn't feel that peace that I felt. I felt a little bit of trepidation and anxiety and uncomfortableness about his death. And I don't know where he was going. I don't know what happened to that man. Again, he was in his 20s. He wasn't even 30 years old yet. Found all this out later. And the hardest thing about him was seeing all his personal things on the ground, like that had fallen out of the car. I guess he played golf, and there were golf balls just laying around the car. And I remember looking up after I felt his pulse stop and seeing everybody just stare down at me and just say, "Is he alive? Is he alive?" And I just said, "No, he's not. He's not alive." And I never told any of them that I felt his pulse because it was such an emotional thing for me. And it was my own personal experience. And I also felt like it just hurt that they didn't even come down there to be with me. I just remember thinking there's actually like men up there, and not that men are supposed to be stronger than women, but it still hurt. It hurt that not any of them came down there with me. And I remember just climbing, just staying down there for a little bit, I guess, when the police came, and then don't remember even what I said to the police. I mean, I hate to say it, but when you're the first responder, you really get shoved to the side a little bit. And if I ever go to a scene again and find the first responder, I'm going to really give them some love and comfort, because you really do feel like you are part of this thing that is so emotional, and not that you want to share it with anybody right away, but you just feel like, okay, here I go. They're all done with me and I'll just leave. Not that I even did anything but be the first one to find a person, but it's traumatizing, I'll tell you that much. I for years thought about that. And I had, like I said, been with many people that died in the hospital and never felt like I didn't obsess on it. I felt like I had done the best I could and I'd been able to help them. And I didn't obsess on that. You know, it's a memory that I have. It was a privilege to be there with them. But finding those two young men, it really hit me hard. So my son at the time was very young. I mean, he might have been like, I don't know, 15. But when my son, I remember, turned like 22, 23, it brought back these rushes of finding those men because I just thought of my son. And I thought, man, those two men were somebody's sons. They were people's sons. And it kind of came back over me again, the sadness and the heartache of it all. And the weirdest thing was, I think more about the man that I didn't feel that peaceful feeling when I touched him, and I felt like this not good feeling about him passing. And I actually one day was running and happened to run right over that spot where he died without thinking about it and felt that rush again of something that wasn't good. And I thought, I don't understand why I would still feel that. And this was like 10, 15 years later that I was running over that spot. I mean, literally 10 or 15 years later. And I want to tell you about spirituality and God moments. Take you to the story about that young man. Like I said, was like 15 years later. And I had just, for some reason, been thinking about that one young man that died, the one that I didn't have a good feeling about. And then I had said something, I think, to my cousin about him. Literally haven't talked about this in years and years, and mentioned something to her. And then that same day, like within a couple hours, and this is really, really freaky, my friend, another friend, I won't say her name, who I didn't even know knew the story. I guess I told her the story at the time because I actually worked with her at the time. A friend that I didn't talk to every day, hardly ever talked to her maybe once every 6 months when we would try to get together, or one of us, we're a little group of prayer sisters, we talk to each other. Texts me out of the blue, Petra, I was wondering if you remember who that man's name is that you found, you know, that had passed in that car, or died in that car accident. I forget exactly how she worded it. I just paused and just stopped and thought, oh my goodness, this is the weirdest experience. Like, there has to be some kind of spiritual or something happening bigger than just me here, I guess is the way to put it, standing here. There's like some kind of spiritual thing going on around us as human beings, whether it's demons and angels or Satan and God, and like there's just so much around us. And this just put it right into the forefront of me that this was right in my face on this one day within a couple hours. 2 conversations about the same guy with 2 people that weren't even friends, who I was friends with separate. So, I mean, I know that seems really odd and really weird, but that's just, I don't know, that just was very odd. So, okay, so there I explained to you just a few of my experiences with death, but there's 2 very close to me home death experiences I want to talk about. But first, I'm going to tell you about a friend who her dad was dying. I was in my 30s and I worked with this woman, and I'm a workaholic. I'm not as much a workaholic now. I learned to balance my life a little better, but definitely in my 30s, my 40s, I was a workaholic, and I was in my 30s, and my life was about my children and work. My ex-husband was a fisherman, so he was essentially never home. I think I saw him on Sundays, and that was it. So I would go to work and take care of the kids, go to work and take care of the kids. And I loved my work because the work was kind of like a little escape from reality for me. It was like where I didn't have to clean the house. I didn't have to do the chores. I didn't have to like take care of like house things. I could just really develop my own thing at work. So I loved work. So my friend, who was a fellow nurse and we worked together, her dad was getting ready to pass. And she knew he was going to pass. I mean, she pretty much knew. One of those scenarios where he's either going to pass in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months. We don't know. But it was the end of his life. And I remember she took off from work. And it was a big deal because, you know, we were busy and she took like probably, I guess, an FMLA. At the time, I didn't even know what an FMLA was. Now that I've been a director, I know what an FMLA is. But then I was a nurse on the floor. So she took an FMLA and she was out. And it was just taking a very long time for her dad to die. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, she has to come back to work. She's going to lose her job. And my stress level for her was getting higher and higher because I think she had exhausted her FMLA, and I could hear people whispering around talking about her, and she's not going to be able to come back to work. She's going to lose her job, blah, 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 blah. I can't believe it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got to at least come back for a little bit, maybe just spend time with her dad at night. You know, she's got to get here. She's got to figure out how to like not be away from work so much. She's going to have to balance her life better. Well, guess what? He ended up dying, you know, maybe within a week or two of all this panic and craziness that we were all having at work, talking about her and wondering, why isn't she coming back? She's going to lose her job. It was like all about us. We need her back. She should be here working. What is she doing? And she opted to not worry about work and to take care of her father. Well, lo and behold, my feelings changed later. My grandmother, beautiful woman, 90 years old, I mean, stubborn as heck. I almost said the bad word. Stubborn as heck. Was super healthy up until that last year. I mean, this woman never went to the hospital. I think she was admitted to the hospital one time overnight, and that was just to get a CAT scan. And I think she immediately left in the morning when she fell, and she didn't even want to go when she fell, but the neighbor insisted on taking her. And she ended up being fine. But I know I don't ever remember her being in the hospital. 90 years old, super healthy. 1 year, she died. And in November on her birthday, I was helping her pick out a pretty shirt for her 90th birthday, and she was trying on her clothes in front of me, and she would always like get dressed in front of me. I remember thinking, man, my grandmom's 90 and she still has muscles, because she had 2 acre property and she still took care of it. I mean, this woman was still trying to clean out her gutters and like do stuff that she shouldn't be doing. So she was a very healthy 90-year-old woman. And I remember she changed her shirt and she put on this pretty polka dot shirt. And she's like, honey, does this shirt make me look old? And I said, Grandma, you are old. And at that point, she had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And she was dying. And by the blood work and all, you would look at her, you would never know she was dying. But she was dying. And she did die. Let me see, her birthday was in November. She died in February. No. Oh my goodness, I'm ashamed of myself that I can't remember the exact day she died. It was soon after she died, because I think she died before the new year. But, oh my gosh, shame on me, I can't remember the day, but it was shortly then after. But my mom, my beautiful mother, I would go on the weekends and visit Grandma as much as possible. My brother Luke, amazing, had been there to help her at the end of her life and stayed with her, gave kind of put his life on hold for a while to stay with her and be there with her. And then my mother at the very end was with her like every day. At the very, very end, we got a hospital bed for her, and she died right in her living room. But my mother was with her every day, and I remember I thought back to that story about my friend who was with her dad every day. And I thought, how could it have been if we had abandoned my grandmother because we all said we had to go to work? And this was the very end of her 90-year life. And it just put life and death into perspective for me. And like I said, what a privilege it is to be with someone. And I'm so happy that my mom could be with my grandma when she died. And it wasn't like that Mary Elizabeth story where my grandma was alone, and that Jesse story where he was alone dying. She had my mother with her, which was a blessing. Just like my friend's father had his daughter with her when he died. And I think about how special that was. Well, then I'll tell you about the last death that I have to talk to you about. Actually, it's not the last death. It's the second to last death. My father had coronary artery disease, and through the years he had like multiple heart attacks, not really much heart damage, but he had 12 stents put in. Finally, the last year of his life, he had a more major heart attack, and this had caused him to have major heart damage. And even though every day that last year of his life, he got up and he got dressed and he acted like he was super muscular and he could lift things and he could do all these amazing things, he was struggling. He would take like a million naps in the day. He constantly was asleep in his chair. He was failing. He actually went into like full system failure. My mom ended up rushing him to the hospital, but even in the way into the ICU, he was flirting with the nurses, teasing them, talking to them. Then they transferred him to another hospital, Atlantic Care, and I drove quickly to that hospital from Pennsylvania to be with my mother and him. Only it was post-COVID, and the week before he was admitted, no one was even allowed in ICU. No one. So if my dad had been admitted to ICU 1 week before, my mother and I weren't even allowed in there. Because it was a week later, my mother, one person was allowed to go up, and it was my mother. And I was sitting in the parking lot of this hospital in the car, and this was in February, and I was waiting constantly back and forth. My mother would call me, and the ICU doctor soon figured out, she was a female doctor, she soon figured out that it was easier to call me and talk to me because my mom was hysterical. My mom couldn't even make simple decisions, and we were trying to figure out what to do because his legs had become ischemic, his one leg, and they took him to the OR to do a cut down, and the cut down they thought was going to help him, but when they brought him back, he didn't have any circulation, and they were discussing taking him back to the OR to cut his legs off. Now at this point, he had never woken up yet. He was still asleep on the ventilator because they brought him back, and again, of course, he wasn't stable yet. They didn't take him off the ventilator. They wanted to discuss whether we wanted to have his legs amputated, and they said that he probably would live if we did that, and that he would be in a wheelchair and on dialysis full time, that my mother wouldn't be able to lift him, so he'd probably have to be in a home. And what do we want to do? So the doctor figured out, she kept calling me because my mom kept saying, call my daughter, call my daughter, call my daughter, talk to her. She'll know what to do. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. I knew that I didn't want my dad to get his legs amputated. I knew I wanted my father to pass and die peacefully at that moment. I knew what I wanted for my father, but I needed to know that that's what my mother wanted, and it was really hard because I wasn't in ICU with her standing there, and she was just not herself. The ICU doctor said, I want you to come up here. I want you to just tell them that I said you have to come in. And it was going against their 2-person policy. I went in there, and the long and the short story is we both stood next to my father, and we held his hand. They had extubated him, and they said that he might open his eyes because he didn't have any heart or brain damage. I mean, during the whole surgery, they said he might wake up perfectly coherent quickly. We gave him as they were extubating him, and I knew he was going to be asleep, and I was so happy that she did that. I wanted to, like, just, oh, I was so thankful. I don't think my mom even noticed. So my mom held one hand, and I held the other, and we watched him just peacefully breathe slowly, and his heart rate just gets slower and slower, and he looked so peaceful, and there was no jerking, there was no shaking, there was no heavy breathing. He just died. And I will never forget that I could be there with him and my mother when he died. And it was a good thing. It was good, but it was horrible too. It was good though. And I just think if we were there 1 week before, and it just made me think of all the families, can't even imagine, that had to go through COVID not being with their loved one. And I don't want to say what my opinion is about that as a nurse in that situation, and the families not being able to come see their families. I just think that was a time that was just, I just can't even believe that happened still. Anyway, so then this last death I'm going to talk about is the one that I didn't get to be a part of. And it was my ex-husband's death. And at the end of his last 2 years of life, he pushed me away. And I knew he was going to die within 5 years. I knew it. And I didn't know what to do to help him because he wouldn't let me help him. So we got divorced, and he died within a year after our divorce. And we were still friendly. We still talked on the phone. Didn't see him as much. I didn't feel like it was healthy to see him, but we talked on the phone. And I talked to him Friday, and I said, "How are you doing? What's going on? Are you getting the help that you need? Are you taking your vitamins? Are you blah, 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 blah?" Yeah, I am. I'm doing really good. And he just, like, it's the same thing he always said. "I'm fine. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good." And he died on Sunday. And my heart hurts because I know he was alone in his apartment when he died. And I just think he pushed us all away, and it makes me sad. And I don't need to get into the details of it because he was a beautiful man who was struggling with a lot of things. And he was stubborn. And I can tell you, he would have pushed me harder and harder away the more I tried to see what I could to help him. And I think in those situations where someone dies that you can't help and they push you away and you don't know what to do, you can't blame yourself. You can't blame yourself. You can't blame yourself. You have to just know that that person is somewhere, hopefully, that is a better place. And now, when I go to his graveside and I stand next to it, I actually thank the Lord that he's in heaven, because I know he's in heaven. And I thank the Lord that he's there. And I feel this great peace that he's in heaven. And I know that that's my take on death. And I hope you'll listen to my podcast after this, because I think it's going to be a really good one. And my redo. Okay, so stand up, right? This is my redo, because how do I make this death podcast into a stand up and redo? Because that's my motto, right? That's my theme for my podcast. Well, this is it. If I did death of someone I love, I love that I was able to be with my dad. And it wasn't easy. I had to speed there to get there. I had to, like, figure out how to just abandon everything at home and get to be my dad's side. And I think about the older me now, and that I watched my mom go be with my grandmom, and I watched my friend go be with her dad, and acknowledge the the end of life and how precious it is, and how important it is to push aside what other people might expect of you when someone you love is dying, and just be there with that person, because you know it's a privilege, and it is a privilege that is only going to be there that one time to be with that person. So my redo is that me as a woman, an older, wiser woman, wants to be there for people when they're suffering and dying, and know that I need to be there for them and comfort them. And that's my redo. Thank you.
This podcast is a work based on the personal experiences, reflections, and memories of the speaker. The events described are true to the best of the speaker's knowledge and recollection. Some names, locations, identifying characteristics, and timelines have been changed or altered to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. In some cases, composite characters have been created or dialogue has been constructed based on memory. The intention of this podcast is not to defame, malign, or harm any individual or entity. Rather, it is to share the speaker's journey with honesty, vulnerability, and integrity. Any opinions expressed are solely those of the speaker and are not intended as statements of fact regarding any person, group, or organization. Listeners should keep in mind that human memory is inherently subjective and selective, and while every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, this podcast reflects the speaker's perspective and truth. Thank you.